We're so glad to see all of you tonight, and we want to welcome you to this, our 11th program in our series called Baytown the Early Years, a Reminiscence. And tonight we look at school athletics. Before we start, I want to thank the Baytown Sun and David Moldman for the coverage that they've given us, and Lee College and Alan Svensson, who is busy videotaping this. We'll have our panelists tonight, and then at the end we ask anyone from the audience to come up and add any anecdotes or remembrances that you have. So I hope that you will join us for that. We have a terrific group of panelists tonight. Roy Elms, Pete Sultis, Dr. George Wamsley, and Tom Gentry. And we're anxious to hear what all of them have to say. Mr. Elms is returning to be with us tonight. He was on our March program on industry. And tonight he wears a different hat, though, and he'll tell us about his activities in school athletics.
Ms. Meister, ladies and gentlemen, my remembrances, my memory goes back to 1926. Between now and then, my memory gets pretty hazy at times. Before I came here, the year before I came, Goose Creek High School had its first paid football coach. He was here 1 year, I understand. Before that, we had a lot of reports about football in Goose Creek High School. You may have heard rumors and stories about Bill Kellogg, about Brown Magnus, about Burt Black, and the great thing that they did for football. We had some rumors that went on before that even, where they had some volunteer coaches. One of them was Dr. Herbert Duke, who was teaching in the school at that time and volunteered his time to help the football team. Other coaches that they had on a volunteer basis were engineers from the Humble Refinery, college boys who were working out there at that time. Rumors also have it that back in those days, it wasn't uncommon for ringers to be brought into high school teams occasionally. There was quite a rivalry back in those days between Goose Creek High School and LaPorte High School. And one year that rivalry got so keen that they brought in ringers. They kept bringing them in and kept bringing them in until the day of the game, it was Ellington Field versus Camp Pope from Louisiana. In the summer of 1926, a man came to my room in Waxahachie, introduced himself as Herbert Wright, and said he had a job as principal of the Goose Creek High School, and he was looking for a teacher and a coach. After talking for a little while, he offered me that job at a salary of $1,350 a year. Just before school started, I caught a train in North Texas and came to Houston, transferred to another train that went up to Dayton, transferred to another train that came to Goose Creek. Put in a pretty good day that day. The trip from Dayton down to Goose Creek was some 3 hours. The train crew stopped along the road and scattered shell on the roadbed. Goose Creek High School back in those days consisted of 13 women teachers, the principal, and me. One of the women teachers, you may recall was Mrs. Hugh Eccles. The dressing room for the athletic teams back in those days was a wooden building on the back of the playground at Goose Creek High School. It was about the size of this stage. Homemade lockers, wooden lockers, and cold running water. The equipment that I found back then consisted of about 12 headgears and that many shoulder pads and about the same number of pants. The field we played on was the playground back of Horace Mann. No fences, no stands. People walked up and down the sideline, which made it a little uncomfortable for the officials. Goose Creek High School had one bus back in those days. When we made a trip and needed a bus, well, I drove the bus. We'd pick a student before a game and they'd walk up and down the sideline taking up a collection. At the half, they'd bring me what they took up in a cigar box, and we kept it until the game was over. The first physical education class we had in the school system then was a study hall that I took out on an outdoor basketball court, and we played basketball with the admonition that we were not to make any racket because they had an elementary school next door. Back in those days, the boys bought their own football shoes, and we had a shoe shop here in town that became rather sufficient in putting leather cleats on cheap work shoes. The boys also bought the awards that they had at the end of the season, which consisted of a sweater type award, not the jacket that they use now. After football season, we had basketball, which is also on an outdoor court. We had track, which we practiced on a playground. The girls in high school back in those days came and asked if they'd have a basketball team. They put one stipulation on it, and that was that their uniforms would be shorts rather than the old black bloomers that they wore in years prior to that. So we had basketball for boys and for girls, and we often played a doubleheader. When we had a boys basketball game, we'd play the girls first and the boys last. In 1928, it was decided that they needed a new high school, so Robert E. Lee High School was built where it is now. One thing that we had then, at that time before, was a gymnasium and dressing room. We had no football field to practice on, so we'd walk down the railroad track back to what is now Horace Mann, practice for a while, and then walk back down the railroad track to the dressing rooms at the new Robert E. Lee High School. Girls' physical education was installed in the curriculum then, and I taught girls' physical education. They had one advantage over me, but they'd go in the dressing room, and if they didn't want to participate, they stayed in there. I was not allowed to go in and get them. 1930, Margaret and I married, and she came down and was given a job, so I was relieved of the girls' physical education. We had parking space at the side of Robert E. Lee High School. That was used by one boy who had a car. He lived at the mouth of Cedar Bow, and he drove his car back and forth and had the entire end of the building, with the exception of 2 or 3 faculty members that had a car. The football field was needed at that time, so they built one right back of the school where your Robert E. Lee cafeteria is located now. They put a cyclone fence around it and built some stands that we had never had before. Some of the schools in the area, including Galena Park, had also built new football fields, and they named the football field after their football coach. Freeport also built a football field about that time, and they named their football field after their football coach. Our students were loyal to their football coach at that time, so they named the field Elms Field. Somebody decided that they needed a name to put over the field. Somebody made a mistake and put on that sign, Elms Cemetery. That was the beginning of my downfall. In addition to football and basketball and track, girls basketball, we decided that we needed a baseball team. We had no place to play, and after losing 2 of the 3 balls that we had, we gave up. We had no more football team. One year I recall about a basketball tournament that the University at Huntsville sponsored every year. They'd bring in basketball teams from around the area, furnish them with a place to stay, and then have a tournament for a couple of days. That particular year, they assigned us living quarters in the guards' dormitory inside the Huntsville Penitentiary. I had some trouble coaxing those boys that it was all right, that they'd let us out, so we spent the night inside the Huntsville Penitentiary. We had a football field, we had stands, and it was decided that we needed lights back in those days. The school board authorized the selling of bonds to pay for those lights. Bonds were issued and sold for $25 apiece, but after a year or 2, those bonds were redeemed. They were paid for. We won more games back in those days than we lost. People don't believe that now, but it's true. We played such teams as Humboldt, Texas City, Freeport, Eagle Lake, teams from Houston such as Reagan, Melby, Sam Houston. One year we won district championship in, I believe it was called Class A or Class B, I've forgotten. One of our opponents got suspicious, began to look into the records that we had maintained. They found one boy on our team who was a few days over age, so they protested to the district committee. This boy had given us his birthday. We had filled it in on his eligibility blank. He had worked at the Baytown refinery for the summer before. He'd given them at his birthday another date. His mother, when she enrolled him in school some 12 years before, had given another date. We tried to show the district committee that the boy didn't know when his birthday was. They agreed, however, that his mother knew when his birthday was. They disqualified us, and we were eliminated from the district championship. We began a custom back in those days that I believe is maintained now and has been constantly through all the years, and that was the giving of a football banquet at the end of the season. That was successful then, and I understand it's very successful now. Football itself has changed since those days. Back in those days, we did not have a huddle like they have now. We called signals. The backfield boys were numbered 1 to 4. Positioners holding the line on the left side were numbered 1, 3, and 5, and on the right side they were numbered 2, 4, and 6. And then they had a snap number. And when the football quarterback called his signals, he named the back to carry the ball, he numbered where he was to go, and he numbered the snap signal. If the coach couldn't put all that together and the quarterback didn't know what he was doing, it's no wonder that a big old 160-pound tackle couldn't figure out what was going on. The rule was back in those days that you were not allowed to talk when a substitute went into the game. He couldn't say anything until after the first play. Coaching from the sideline was not allowed. We sent a boy in one day to take the place of one of the players inside. In his enthusiasm, he ran out and he said, "Okay, boys, let's go." 15-yard penalty. We solved one problem that we had then on no talking. We carried a notebook in our pocket, and when we wanted to substitute, we'd write on the notebook number 21 for number 31. And he'd carry it out and give it to the referee, and he'd send number 31 off the field. I left coaching jobs in spring of 1933, and for 25 years I officiated up and down this area, running from Bay City to Orange and west as far as Tomball. I remember one time when George Wamsley was playing for Robert E. Lee. He got back to receive a punt. I was field judge that night, and I said, "George, which way you going?" He said, "I'm going to the right." So I sneaked off 20 yards ahead of him so I could keep up. After those years, I decided that the football boys had gotten too fast. The football field had gotten too long, so I retired. I have some old yearbooks up here. Some of you'd like to look at them after the program, dating back to 1929, I believe, or maybe even one or two before then. I thank you for inviting me to come out and review these memories. I appreciate your remembering me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, Pete Sultis is the well-known football coach and retired athletic director for the Baytown School District, and we're anxious to hear his remembrances.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, appreciate the opportunity to give you a rundown. As Henry Armstrong told me this morning, there's no use for these other people being on the program, because he said, you'll talk all night when you get up here. So I'm just going to try to give a rundown. I was very fortunate to come to Baytown in 1947. A unique situation happened. I was at Rice University. We had just won the the Orange Bowl, and with a little man, George Wamsley, the one that really put Robert E. Lee on the map. Red Bell came down to Rice University. I was fixing to sign a pro contract to go play pro football with the New York Yankees, and he said they had a job down in Goose Creek. He was the head coach for the Robert E. Lee Ganders. I told him I'd come down and visit. At that time, Frank James had been hired. I see Frank out there. Beverly Rocko was on the staff. And Holly McLemore was just going out of retirement. He was assistant principal, the baseball coach that year. And I said, well, I'll give it a whirl at spring training. We went through Red Bell spring training, and you never lived until you would see the formations we run. But we had one or two things. We had the greatest talent that I'd seen in a high school football team in a long time. We had only 28 kids out there. But everything was very exciting. Incidentally, Red Bell happened to be one of those unique situations. He graduated from the high school I did, Forest Avenue. He graduated from Rice University, Rice Institute at that time. And I came on to join him, and we had a great staff. But in the spring, when we went to El Paso, Red Bell took the job at Rice University. And so Mr. Stallworth, who was the athletic director, came back to be the head coach. Now, Roy, there's two's going to follow me, and Roy has talked about this. I tried to do a little survey on the Robert E. Lee football coaches. And Roy had told you about the first paying coach. We had about 5 or 6 before Roy mentioned, and they was these free coaches, engineering from the refinery. And 1921 and 22 is the first one I can go back and find, and a guy named I.W. Earls was that free coach. Now, they picked up anybody off the street, anybody to play. 22 to 23 was a fellow named P.H. Green. Then in 23-24, Herbert Duke was the first paid coach, supposedly. And I heard that because he was a team physician, and he let us know that he was the first coach that Robert E. Lee ever had. Now, whether he was talking about a coach or being out there, I really don't know. But he kept telling us he was the first coach. Then after Duke, we had a fellow named Earls from 24-25, and then in 25 we had a fellow named A.M. Blackburn. And then Roy came along. And Roy stayed in 26 to 33. Then a fellow named Doll Cole took over in 1933 to 36. Doll Cole will go down in history. That is when Port Arthur beat us 100 to nothing, 1934. And in 1935, we made an improvement. They only beat us 66 to nothing. Then in 1936, Hap Malone took over. He was the head coach. And then in 1940, 39, Mr. Stallworth, Dan Stallworth, God bless his soul, came from Greenville to Horace Mann, and they elevated him up as the head football coach of Robert E. Lee. And they had a little man that was a freshman out there, and he's sitting right here. He don't look so little now. Same size. I'm so envious at Joyce, it makes me sick. He's the same size as when we went to Rice together. But he had him, and he put Robert E. Lee on the map for football. His record is just unquestionable. 1941, the first year that went to Port Arthur. I won't go through that. 43, they got robbed. And of course, when they played Lufkin in the semifinals, and they was robbed, and official 7-7 they lost. In 1945, they lost in Waco, and then taking up my thing in 47, we came with those football coaches, and then when Mr. Stallworth decided to go back to coaching, he called El Paso and said, Pete, would you find us a coach? Mr. George Gentry was the superintendent. He said he's going to give us one more coach. George Armstrong, who was there, and he was looking for a job. He'd been coaching in Bowie a year, and he said, I'm looking for a job. He had married Delilah, and her parents' partner was here, and so he took the job. So that was our coaching staff in 1947. We had a good football team, and I had ever seen. Great kids. Our captain was Billy Miles and Big John Carroll. You know, they talk about the little kids then. Big John didn't probably weigh but 260. and he hated practice. He hated practice so bad on Monday he never wanted to come. And Mr. Stallworth designated me to get him on Monday. He never liked to go to school on Monday, so I had to go and get him to practice. But he always came to football practice. The principal at that time was R.B. Sparks. Holly McLemore was assistant principal. Mr. McLemore was our coach. We went undefeated that year, played Brackenridge at the stadium out here, and we lost on penetration, the last play of the game, 2-1. That is one year we should have won the state championship. No question about it in my mind. Then the next year that we should, and we had a lot of successful with. Semifinal, we went, probably in 1950, we should have won the state championship. We went to semifinals, lost from Rice Stadium. We had 2 touchdowns called back. 1951, we went to the finals and played Lufkin and lost 12-14. And in 1952, we went to the finals and lost to Lufkin. 1952, we was not the best football team. Robert B. Ray out here, we beat him on a jump pass to Ciraldi, and we probably shouldn't have been there, but we should have won the state in 1941. Going back, I wasn't here then. 1947, 1950, 1951, and probably 1960 for sure. We have yet to win the state champion. We have not been destined. Following online, then when Mr. Stallworth, God bless his soul, probably the greatest coach, fundamental coach that we've ever had. Great psychologist. When we came here, Frank and I, we had gone through, and he had dismissed he dismissed 9, but 28 kids quit. The only one returning in that 1947 ball club from regular was John Adams, who's assistant principal, Robert E. Lee. All the other kids had taken it on the chin, and they had, at that time, they'd already won 1 ball game. They did not win another ball game, and then in 47, we turned it around. And I say probably as good a football team. One thing that Baytown has been gifted with is lots of great talent. Going on down in 1957, I took over as football head coach. 1967, Ronnie Kramer took over as head coach. Then in 1985, Jim Stroud took over as head coach. Ross S. Sterling was open in 1966, and when the staff split. As I say, you just don't have the time for me. If people would ask me questions, I could probably give you a better rundown. Roland Cutler was the first coach in 1966. They played a junior varsity schedule. The first season that Sterling ever played a varsity season was 1967 at Memorial Stadium, Robert E. Lee. We beat them. Roy, I'm telling you about the stadium over here that opened, 1928. We opened Memorial Stadium as it still stands in 1947. We opened Stallworth over here in 1968. And that's where the game we still use. We consolidated with Cedar Ball in 1954 and took over that stadium by a vote of both of the people involved. When Sterling opened up, Roland Cutler was the head coach, and in 1971, Jim Hess took over. And probably Russell Clark will go down in history with the Sterling Rangers. He intercepted a lateral, and they broke the barrier to win the first Robert E. Lee game, and they've done fairly well since that time. After the first year, Mr. Harris, who came from Rice, said he was going to stay in coaching. He stayed only 1 year, and then Mr. Al Dennis took over as head coach in 1972, and they went to the state finals that year. We didn't play it very well, but we did go to the state gym. Played Odessa permanent. Then Al coached for 10 years, and then we hired Bill Bundy for 2 years, 84, 86, and then Galen Finley came in this first year here. The unique thing about Sterling out there is they had the same basketball coach since the inception, Woody Walker. They had the same track coach since the inception and have done exceedingly well. No telling how many district championships. The baseball coach, we've had 2 coaches out at Sterling. And of course, since Ronnie Clue, who went to state finals in 1979, and of course Ralph Hawthorne's the coach now. Robert E. Lee, when I came here, Frank James was the head basketball coach. Following him and Robert E. Lee, Jay Bollinger, then we had Leo Heckler, and of course, now we have Jim Ledbetter. The track coach is a legend in itself. When I came here, a gentleman named Beverly Rocko, and he's probably the most dedicated track coach I've ever seen. He also coached football. Well, I mean, he was out there. He was a trainer, but he was out for football. And God bless his soul, he wanted to get out, and we finally, 2 years later, was able to get him out. He came in 1937. He set up the physical education program, and probably was the greatest physical education man I've ever seen. And he coached until 1971 at Robert E. Lee. Probably the most unique thing that happened then, we named a fellow named Roy Hutchins, a black head coach in track. Roy caught cancer and never coached. Gene Bostic took over that year, and next year became the head coach and is still head coach at Robert E. Lee. In baseball, I was a head coach. Right after me followed John Adams was a head coach. Following him, 1954, we went to the state finals under John Adams. We lost. We came in third place. Should have won. We had two great baseball players in Donnie Hullum and Gary Harrington with a battery, and they were great. Don Trueheart took over for John Adams, and then he won the state championship in 1961. We probably should have won 3 state championships that year. We should have won in football in 60, and then we did win in track and baseball. After Don Trueheart went to Sterling, then Gary Harrington took over and had the head baseball coach. Going back to Rocko as head coach in all those years, won 15 district championships, 3 regional championships, 2 state championships, 55 and 62. And he was runner-up for the state 4 times. The first year in the UIL that they put in cross-country in 1955, Robert E. Lee won the state championship. Another unique thing, we had a school running back over there named Carver. Johnny Peoples was the head coach. Robert Strahan was the assistant coach. A fellow named Lewis was one of the assistant coaches. And they would come over to our clinics and go through all of our process, and then they would go and play their schedule. We integrated in 1966 full. When we Stolen opened, we integrated as a full coaches. Johnny Peoples came to Robert E. Lee, Robert Strahan went to Sterling, Roy Hutchins went to Cedar Bow. The year before, Carver, in my recollection, I will go through, won the state championship in 3 sports. They had a fellow named Gene Washington, and I'm telling you, he's a great athlete and a great gentleman. They won in football, they won in track, and they won in basketball. He was such a great athlete, we opened this, when Exxon gave us the baseball field at Robert E. Lee, he had never played baseball in his life, and he came out that one day when Carver played, and he hit 2 home runs. That just goes to show. Not only that, he went to Michigan State on a football scholarship and a track scholarship. He was the valedictorian of his class. He was from LaPorte. Incidentally, he married a LaPorte girl. He's one of the 4 All-Americans we had in football. He's the only kid that I've ever heard of that felt he owed Michigan State something. He could have signed a pro contract for a certain amount of money, but he told him he owed track season to Michigan State. He ran track, and it cost him $50,000. They quit the bidding process. Now he's on the staff at Michigan State. The other 3 All-Americans we've had, full-played All-American, is Cassie Johnson, 49, played Robert E. He went to Rice University. Herbie Gray played in 1951, Gander, final team, went to Texas University, made All-American. He was run off his junior year at Texas for dissipating. Came back his senior year, came down here and made All-American. Went to the Canadian League and played Canadian football for 11 years, and I noticed he was picked as the outstanding athlete for the 25-year period. Then we had a gentleman named Tom Stohansky. Could play just about any. I'm not going over Wamsley because he's going to talk about himself. But we had Tom Stohansky, and I'll tell you, he could do it all. We've had probably, and I didn't go over the board, we've probably had 50 to 60 all-state boys in this community. We've had, I think, 22 kids that played in the all-star game. I won't mention those names, it takes so long. But Tom Stohansky was probably one of our best athletes. He could play center, which he did. He could play quarterback, which he did. He played fullback, which he did, but he made All-American at end at Texas University. But he used to tickle me. He said, "Look at those big old boys, Mr. Pete." And I said, "They're looking at you, son. You're a big old boy, you see." I can truly say I love that Tom Stohansky, and he gave me my nickname, Mr. Pete. He said, "We don't like to call you Coach or Mr. Sultis. We call you Mr. Pete." I wrestled and tussled with that. He was on the 47 ball club. It was the most rewarding thing to see those kids. They was outstanding students, but just outstanding kids. Of course, he's a lawyer today and doing exceedingly well down at San Antonio. Then our situation we've gone to, Corver had done well. After Cedar Ball, we got great athletes, great kids from Cedar Ball. Then the inception of girls athletes came into our problem in 1973. Nobody told us we had to add the girls sports, but we added them, and we have exceedingly done well in girls sports. We added basketball, volleyball, and track. We already had tennis and swimming. And of course they have done three well, and it's amazing that when we first put the program, I was athletic director, it cost us $40,000. If we put that programs in, those three programs a day, it cost us $540,000. The inception of all of the programs, as I say, I could probably give you a rundown better if you asked me questions. There's so many things that happen and so many great things. Baytown has been very gifted with support. There's the traditional support of the Baytown Brigadiers, the Robert E. Lee Great Band, Ross S. Sterling, their great band, the Stars. The sport that we just won the state championship is not a UIL sport, water polo. But we ought to put it in. We need to win, but we compete well in that. Football has always been on the upswing. It's the money that produces and helps support the other sports. I don't believe that you'll find any coach or any player that won't give support to the community. I am very fortunate that I was able to come to Goose Creek. Then they consolidated the year I was here, now Baytown, and be part of the program. I could really give you a dissertation. I could run by every little thing. Roy Elms was talking to Robert Lee. When they hired me, the building was just as he said, but they had 15 cars there then, Roy. Lee College was in Robert E. Lee. The Elms field was back there. And we used to practice on the field. Now they built the first thing they did was build a cafeteria. The kids wanted to eat. And then everything has been a milestone and tradition and built up. I live with a fellow named Mose Sumner, which sold the property of the Memorial Stadium to Goose Creek Schools. All that corner he sold. Great supporter. One thing about it, they hate each other, our two high schools, but when we get in the playoff, they're all the one. Anytime that I can help any of you anyway, lots of research, and as I say, I really didn't know what you wanted me to say. Had lots of funny stories with lots of great athletes, and they always come around. I see about 10 sitting out there now, the coach. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, Dr. George Wamsley's ears must have been burning last month because we heard about his involvement with sorting the Robert E. Lee yearbook. But we can tell from what we've heard tonight, he was also very involved with sports, and we're anxious to hear about it.
Thank you, Ms. Mazur. Yes. Mr. Elms said that he came to Robert E. Lee or Baytown in 1926. That was the year I was born. And of course we knew and had been associated with Mr. Elms for a long time. The only exposure that I have to Gander or Robert E. Lee athletics was during the 4-year period that I played here at Robert E. Lee. And so that I will like to give you a few of the things that that impacted upon me at that time. And I guess the thing that impacted on me the most was Mr. Stallworth. Many of you were here and knew him, but you had to play for him to really get the feeling of what went on. He was a very, very stern appearing man, but a very, very sincere and gentle man inside. He treated his athletes rather abruptly in a sense sometimes, but you always knew that he had a lot of admiration for you and he was your friend. For me, it started out in junior high school, and like Pete says, I'm the same size now as I was then. He came over to the junior high school in Baytown and was looking over the prospective athletes that were coming to Robert E. Lee. And we were all up on the bleachers up there, and he was going by and asking the names and how tall you were and how much you weighed and so forth and so on. And he came to me, and I thought, you know what, he's just going to kind of jump over me, but he said, sounds like you're about right. So that made a big impression on me, and it made me feel like that he was a coach that I could play for. The teams back in 1940 and 41, in fact the 1940 ball club at Robert E. Lee only had about 19 players. We had some of those older fellows that Mr. Elms was talking about. One of the boys, Slew Jennings, was on that team, and one of the older Wunch boys from out of Highlands. We had a boy named Bettis on there. Bettis impressed all of us, I think, because he had to shave every day. The rest of us didn't shave too much at that time. But the thing that that impressed me in this program was the dedication that the coaches got out of the students and the boys. At least they got it out of me, because I remember many times being pretty well fatigued when I came home, and that was before the days of air conditioning, and nobody had air conditioning anywhere, and it just was hot out there. We had 2 days. Back those days, they didn't give you any water. Of course, a lot of guys in this room played like that, and you didn't get a chance to get a drink of water. So what you wound up doing, of course, was wringing out the guy's jersey in front of you and sucking on the jersey to get the water. Of course, it was a little salty and a little dusty, but those guys that have been there, I know what I'm talking about. Back in 1936, I suppose, was my earliest recollection of Robert E. Lee football. My parents had a box seat on the sidelines, and we used to go and see the games. Eddie Utes and M.J. Lyons and W.T. Jones and Crap-Eye Johnson were the group of guys that played in those days. And it was very glamorous. It was nighttime, and it was a very, very adventuresome type of thing. Didn't really realize then that later on I would be a principal in that program, but that did come to pass. And then when we went to high school, Mr. Stallworth came over, as Pete said, and we came to high school at the same time. And right away, he began to develop a very, very well-structured program, and he would write playbooks, and he would write small booklets, these little spiral notebook booklets. He would put your name on the front of it and write things in there that he anticipated that you would do, or that you would, how you would play. And of course the quarterbacks got the playbooks. From the very beginning, it became obvious that we were on the cellar in this area at that time, and that his idea was to inculcate in those players the idea that we were going to get up off the cellar. And to that end, I think our first year in 1940 was about a 50-50 season. We did get beaten by Port Arthur that year in 1940, 20, I think, or something, to nothing. But after that, the amount of energies and the amount of dedication, and I'm talking about all of these players, and after I played at Robert E. Lee, I went to Rice Institute and played with Pete, never did see again the dedication that existed here in Dan Stallworth's program. But we started to work, and of course they called us the Ragnots at that time, and like Mr. Elms said, one of our tackles, the big tackles, weighed 168 pounds, and I think I weighed about 139 pounds. But anyway, it came together, and Holly McLemore, I guess was it 42 or 41 that Holly was here, I don't know which, but anyway, he kept us loose. And those of you that knew Holly McLemore knew that he was just as tense a person as there ever was. He'd go around saying, "Stay loose, stay loose." And he was anything but loose. But anyway, time went on, and we were successful, and then the great game came up with Port Arthur, and we played them over there in Port Arthur. I think it was on Saturday afternoon. This was during the war, and I don't believe we had night games then because of the war and the lights. But that game was not going well, and Dr. Duke, who had been a coach, was still coaching from the sidelines. He was the team doctor, but he was tearing up those officials. In fact, I know that we were threatened, that is, our side was threatened more than once by the official, that if that old gray-haired man didn't shut up, we were going to get penalized. And of course, Dad was a good friend of Herbert Duke's, and they kind of had an understanding that Herbert would kind of back off a little bit. But he had that vernacular that everybody understands was very colorful, and he talked to that official directly, and the game went on as I could remember, and all those Port Arthur guys were always tough, and they were always good, and I mean they were plenty good. They used to wear little ribbons in their helmets, and I don't know, that gave them some kind of a camaraderie, I guess, and it eased their, or cohesed their team efforts. And so we had some very serious players on our team at that time. We had a boy named Johnny Cubic, and we had Joe Hazelwood, and Milton Scott, and we had Thibodeau, Leonard Thibodeau. Those two boys were killed in World War II. But anyway, the game rocked along, and we were behind, as I recollect, the latter part of the game, and somehow or another, Johnny and I were playing in the backfield. Johnny Cubic and I were playing in defensive backfield. He came up to me, and he was very bewildered and kind of seemed like he was confused, actually, but he was just excited and caught up in the game. But he was, you know, if you had asked him what his name was, he probably couldn't have told you at the time. But anyway, he played a good game, and he was very instrumental in carrying the ball on a play that put us into a position for scoring. And that was one of the turning points in that game. And then in the last quarter, we did score again, and then we did, Johnny Allman kicked the extra point. I had broken a hand in the week or two before a South Park game, and we were backed up against our own goal line at one time, and I was the punter for the Ganders, and here I am standing in the end zone, foot on the back line, and a cast on one hand, and these poor other guys coming in, and I call that pretty tough pressure. But we kicked it out, and we finally won that game. Worst time I ever remember playing football for Robbie Lee was in Dallas. The next year we played a doubleheader. That meant we started playing around 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And we played Forest, Forest Park down, Forest House. Mean boys, tough boys, and they beat us 12-0. This was 1942. Well, anyway, things went on, and we had a good year in 42. I had an injury in 42, and 43 we came back and had a good year in 43. We had some real fine ball players: Bill Taylor, Slick Ellis, and Ted Hunt, and I just can't remember. I can't mention them all because I can't remember them right off. But we went and did play Lufkin in the semifinals. And I always liked Pete's attitude. We got robbed, you know. If you don't win, you get robbed. So that's not a bad attitude. I don't know if we got robbed. I think we just got whipped. The Lufkin had a pretty good ball club up there. And we played in Rice Stadium. Talking about Rocko, Beverly Rocko, track coach, I ran track for Beverly in high school. And he was he was just as much a disciplinarian as Dan Stallworth was, but a much milder person. And he liked to always run you over distance. You know, he'd run you a 660 or he'd run you a 330. And those are very grueling distances to run when you're running as fast as you can run. And I remember we went to the state meet my senior year, and we had been running, I ran a 100-yard dash in 2:20, and the 100-yard dash came up and ran it, and when it was over, I had run a 9.800, and I had placed third in the high school 100-yard dash. A boy from Austin or somewhere ran a 9.5 or 9.6 and a 9.7, and that shows you how fast those young people were back in those days. In fact, when I went to Rice the next year and running for the Southwest Conference, I won the 100-yard dash in the Southwest Conference in Dallas with a 9.800. So it shows you that college was not as fast as high school was. Getting back to Elms Field, which was behind Robbie Lee, we, the football players, were employed in the summertime to work. That used to be what was known as the weight program. And now we have what's called a weight program, where you lift weights all year long. Well, back then you just got a shovel and you worked your weights in the summertime, digging ditches and doing things like that. And we, you know, Mr. Stallworth was the straw boss out there in the contract, so to speak. And we'd haul in dirt, and they would put it on Elms Field, and we would get out there with rakes, and we'd rake that stuff. And he had somebody out there with a surveyor's tool, and he was sloping that field. So you can see that we actually prepared the surface on which we played, which I think is good. The other thing is, Mr. Rocko, Coach Rocko, had us work on the track, and we had to rebuild his track. He had a crew of us, and this was people like Walter Roberts and myself and Slick Ellis and Paul Bill Kern and a group like that. So then you ran on the track that you helped construct, and that gives you a little bit of a close feeling for those things. Well, I don't have too much more to say. I do want to say this, that I had a tremendous lot of fun, tremendous satisfaction in athletics, mainly because I've been able to play, or was able to play, with some very fine and high class and high caliber athletes. I know I sometimes tell my children that Bobby Landry was playing blocking back for Texas when Pete and I played Texas in 1946 in Houston. And Bobby Lane was playing there. Hub Bechtel was playing there for Texas. And Moncrief and some of his people were playing up at A&M. And then we had this White, Tittle was playing. And then over at LSU. And this other guy at LSU was, what's that other runner over there that, well, I can't remember his name right offhand, but it gives you a lot of satisfaction when you play the best. And the two teams that I enjoyed, I guess, playing the most was Port Arthur and Texas, because you knew that when you played them, you were playing some people that could really play, and when you beat them, it was so good. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Well, Tom Gentry was also mentioned last month, and his student picture was shown in our slide presentation. But we're really glad to have him in person tonight.
I appreciate the invitation to come and speak to you tonight. I'm the least qualified of your four speakers to be on this program. I neither coached in Baytown athletics, nor was I a particular outstanding athlete during my high school career here, as Dr. Wamsley certainly was, but I have some thoughts and recollections of some of the things that took place, in particular some of the individuals that were involved in athletics during the period of time that I was involved in high school here in Baytown. I think as I spent some time recalling what was really outstanding about athletics in Baytown, when I was in school, I would have to somewhat disagree with some of the remarks that have been made here tonight about some of the tremendous athletes. I think we had some very good athletes. I think we had only a handful of real outstanding athletes. I attribute most of the success that was obtained here during the period that I was in school primarily to the coaching staff, and then also to the community of Baytown and the support that they gave athletics. The coaching staff at that time, the head coach was Dan Stallworth, and the assistant coaches were Pete Sultis and Frank James on the varsity. And then George Armstrong and James Slick Ellis worked with the suicide squad, and then also worked with the varsity. And then when we got in the playoffs, they spent their full time working with the varsity team also. Mr. Stallworth was a very unusual man. He had some very unusual characteristics. He was a very tough and demanding person, and yet at the same time he had a great love for his players. In 1950, we had a very successful team, and it has been mentioned in 51 and 52, a lot of notoriety was made about the fact that we went to the state finals and played in the state finals against Lubbock 2 years in a row. As Mr. Seltus said, we should have won the game in 1951. In 1952, probably we should have lost, and we did. But in 1950, very little recognition is given to the fact that we were in the semifinals that year. So I had the pleasure of being in school when my freshman year we were beaten in the semifinals, and my junior and senior year we went to the state finals. In 1950, the co-captains were Gordon Kellogg and Sherwood Hensley. I saw Sherwood earlier, who's here tonight. It always seemed that in those years we had our co-captains. One was kind of a holler guy, and the other guy was the guy that just went out there and was real quiet and let out, and you followed. Sherwood Hensley was the holler guy. He was very enthusiastic. Gordon Kellogg was a very quiet, mild-mannered sort of a guy that just got it done on the football field. Incidentally, Gordon continued at Rice University and had a very fine career there. Just to mention a few of the people that played in the 1950 team: John Flint, Bill Bryant, Paul Parkinson, Buford Pewitz, Roger Gary, Tommy Brundred, Bob Stout, Jimmy Mowry, Jack Kramer, and Bobby Collins. The record that year was 11 wins and 2 losses. In the district play, Robert E. Lee scored 360 points and their opponent scored 52. The following year, in 1951, when we went to the state finals for the first time during that 3-year period, the record once again was 11 and 2. In 1952, the record was again 11 and 2. So in that 3-year period, our record was 33 wins and 6 losses. And other than, in my recollection, other than Abilene High School, who I think won 3 state championships in a row, probably the finest 3-year record that I can recall in high school football in the state of Texas. In 1951, our captains were Mickey Pilla, who resides here in Baytown, and Lanny Henniger. Neither one of those guys was a holler guy. Both of them kind of led by example, but in addition to those two, some of the seniors who led that football team were Kevin Lonsberry, Darrell Stroud, Melvin Spence, Eugene Fail, Andy Balky, Bill Bradbury, James Carnes, Robert Visser, James Stevenson, James Golden, Jimmy Wamsley, George's younger brother, and Herb Gray, who's been mentioned as a consensus All-American at the University of Texas when he played there. In 1952, my senior year, our captains were Norman Adams, who has 2 sons that played for Sterling this year, who are a little bit larger than he was, but in those days he was a very large, talented athlete. Norman was about 6'3" and weighed about 240 pounds, had great quickness and great speed. Went to the University of Texas. Had it not been for an unfortunate automobile accident, would have probably been one of the greatest football players that ever came through Robert E. Lee at the college level. Fred Ernst was the other co-captain. Fred was the silent one, and Norman was the holler guy. We had a smallish quarterback that played for us, similar probably to the height and weight of Dr. Wamsley, a little bit taller but did not weigh much more than Dr. Wamsley, and that was Gerald Arton. He quarterbacked the Robert E. Lee Ganders for his junior and senior year and part of his freshman year. Gerald was a very talented young guy, and here I get back to the success of the coaching staff. We had no tremendous amount of speed on that team. We had pretty good size. In my opinion, we had no real tremendous athletes, probably other than Norman Adams. But at that time, the rage was the Oklahoma split T formation. And we had the best mechanics of probably any high school team that I can recall or having ever seen played. We drilled and worked out our formations to perfection. Mr. Stallworth demanded that, and his coaching staff demanded that. And in my opinion, the 3 years I was in high school, we went further with athletes who played up to their maximum ability and sometimes really beyond their God-given ability than any group of people I was ever involved with. I played at the college level, had the opportunity to play with some great athletes. Two of the fellows that played with me at SMU are now head football coaches in the National Football League, Forrest Gregg at Green Bay, and Raymond Berry, who was in the Super Bowl last year with the New England Patriots. But I can truly say that I was never involved with finer men, finer leaders, or finer coaches than the coaching staff here in Baytown. Since Mr. Sultis has already mentioned the Carver program, I think all of us that were in the area at that time recall going out on Saturday night and watching the Carver teams play. They were very successful. In addition to Gene Washington, I took the opportunity to call Eddie Frank Green, who was the principal at Carver High School during that period of time, and he mentioned several other players that were truly outstanding. Alvin Richardson, who was a great football, basketball, and track man. The Wheatfall brothers and the Carr brothers were outstanding athletes. Johnny Peoples, as has been mentioned, was the football coach. Coach Robert Strahan was the basketball coach, assistant football coach, and then, as Mr. Seltus mentioned, Roy Hutchins was the track coach and helped in football. During the years that I was in school, we also had some real success in other areas. Mention's already made of Coach Rocko and his track teams. He did win 2 state championships. Leo Laborde was the tennis coach back in those years. He had 2 players that won the state doubles tennis championship 2 years in a row. Fine feat at that time, Rollin Russell and Rob Middleton. And then in later years, Thurman Watson and Paul Wilkins and Don Dixon were also involved in state championship tennis matches in the Interscholastic League there in Austin. I think they won the doubles championship 4, 5, or 6 times during a period of about 10 years. So I would just sum up my part of the program by saying that I have great memories of athletics in Baytown schools. I have the privilege of continuing to have some connection with the Baytown school system now and observing the fine system. You know, athletics is not the ultimate of a school situation. The purpose of schools is to educate children. But it's pretty difficult to get your cheerleaders up and have a good cheering section for National Merit Scholar winners. Although that's a great accomplishment, it's difficult to rouse up the community about that type of accomplishment. Or for that matter, is the great Robert E. Lee Band. I remember Jake Burkett and the contribution his band made during those periods, the great bands. But what I remember most was the community and the support that we had when we were in school. I can remember very vividly people not exaggerating the fact that when Robert E. Lee played on Friday night, that you probably couldn't buy a gallon of gas in Baytown. All the gas stations were closed because all the people that worked at them were at the ball game. And you probably couldn't get a good hot meal because all the people that managed the cafes and the restaurants in town were at the ball game. So in those days, everything shut down and everybody went to the ball game. Those days are gone forever, and like everything else in life, everything changes. Nothing stays the same. But those were great days, and we'll have great days in Baytown in the future. We still have great support for our schools and for our athletics. but nothing will ever be exactly the same as it was in those days when it was all for one and one for all in Baytown. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank all of our panelists who were just so terrific. And now we do have time, though. We hope that some of you will come and add. Sam Bramlett will start us off.
Well, I'm not the senior member of this group, but almost. I guess I'm kind of a silly old fellow or something, but I kind of lean toward the women a little bit. And there's two of these special women here tonight that I hope I'll not embarrass them by saying something about them. Margaret Elms, will you stand, please? This is Margaret Elms. When we had our high school basketball banquet, Margaret and Roy served this banquet to us basketball players at their home on Pierce Street. And it's the first banquet I ever went to in my life. This was a seated dinner. Not one of those finger sandwich things, but a seated dinner. Margaret and Roy, we appreciate you. I played basketball for him, but I couldn't run track for him because I wasn't fast enough. I wasn't like George. We formed a G Association in the middle 30s to try to get some pep going for the Robert E. Lee. And we bought the first movie camera that the Ganders ever had so they could take pictures and study the film so that the boys couldn't wiggle out of the mistakes they made. And I'm sure it's been gone for a long time. We had another thing happened that George didn't tell you, but he should have. Along about 1938 or 39, we had a junior high banquet over at the old Baytown Junior High. And there was a man came here as superintendent, and you didn't mention him, is Harmon Lohman. We have never had a more enthusiastic supporter of athletics and Robert E. Lee Ganders than Harmon Lohman. And he did a lot of things for us, and we wanted to do something to get the spirit going for Baytown. So we formed the Club of 41. And that night from somewhere, we got T-shirts. And they had the Club of 41 on them. And people want to know what's that for. Well, we said, that's the day, that's the time when we're going to win the district. We set that date, that night, and Morris Frank was a Toastmaster. We set that date and that year, and we won it. George has told you about that. But the way he got started was over in the Humble Park over there playing these boys, their football, and he was the only one in the community over there that had the football. He'd line these boys up and get them in position. He'd get them in position, go back, and then he'd go back to the quarterback and call the plays. He'd line them up. That's the way he did. His folks was on the sideline watching. Now the other lady I want to pay a compliment to, and that's George's mother. Ms. Wamsley, would you stand? Now George has in that group back there a wife, a brother, and a son. This is the way the people have always supported him. I wish there was some of the Sutphens here to see this. The Sutphens and the Wamsleys were real close. And you missed a treat in your life if you didn't know George Wamsley. Big George. Anyhow, another thing that was unusual, we started selling season tickets right after Elms Field was built. And this was something unheard of in Baytown, was a football season ticket to see those Ganders play. Man. Well, you've never sat through a 100-0 football game. And that's what we did over there in Port Arthur one time. There is no need of any coach or anybody beating a team like they did us. But we got it back on them by George Wamsley. It's really been a treat to hear and to hear these things, and there's lots of other stories to be told, and but enjoy coming to hear these real giants. And to the other women, I don't mean to bypass the other women in the coach's life, because let me tell you, the coaching staff, by and large, over the whole state, do more to build character and help people, help students, than any other group of profession. You just mark it down. They've helped more kids than anybody else. And that's what it's all about.
Thank you. I hope we can have some more stories. Will someone else come up and give us some anecdotes? Any of these former athletes that we have in the audience?
There's one more story.
All right.
There's one more story that I can't go without. You know, Tommy and George, they made all conference in Southwest Conference, you know, which is a great achievement. We're one of the few teams in 1955 around the state, and probably ever will be, that had 5 all-state linemen. And we had one kid that I think would have probably been on the All-American list had he gone to school and hadn't hurt his head. A gentleman named Tillman O'Brien. He made All-State and probably was as good a football player that we had at Robert E. Lee. We had an end named Armour McManus that made All-State. We had a guard named Prentice Davis. We had a center named Bill Laughlin. And then we had a tackle named Bill Young. They all made All-State. That's 5 linemen. So that year, I did a sorry coaching job. We just went to the semifinal. We should have won state. And I did want to remember that, mention that about Tillman. I think had he continued on in Texas, there's no question in my mind that he would have been our 5th All-American. Just wanted to say that.
Is there anyone else?
I'd like to add, to teach you correctly, I believe Tillman O'Brien was the first football player that Darrell Water recruited when he came to Texas. Is that correct, Pete?
I think he was in that first group, yes.
I think it was.
He was, but he couldn't play because of his head.
We still have a little time.
I was growing up in Port Arthur, and a lot of and listen, we had lived in absolute terror in Goose Creek. It really did. Y'all scared to miss that of us. And when we had our bonfires, we always burned again.
I think Mr. Elms is going to tell us something else. You want to get the mic?
One thing that wasn't mentioned, I think should have been mentioned, when George was playing the junior high, the final game of the season came up between Horace Mann and Baytown Junior High. On the original kickoff, George took the ball and ran for a touchdown. Horace Mann kicked off to Baytown Junior High, and the fellow over there took the ball and ran it back for a touchdown. That's the only time I've ever seen that happen, high school, junior high, or pro. But that looks like we were going to have a great football game that day. Other than that, out at the ball game at Stallworth Stadium, I had a program, and underneath the team, it listed 2 or 3 managers, 2 or 3 trainers under each team. We didn't have trainers or managers back in those days. We had a water boy. That water boy's equipment was a 2-gallon galvanized bucket and a dipper.
Say one of them.
Yeah.
Tom Gentry and I, when we talk about Miss Stallworth, we get pretty sensitive about it. But one thing about Miss Stallworth that was really, really wonderful was that he had a tremendous aptitude at psychology. And one of the things that he did routinely and almost on cue was he had a clipboard. And he always took that clipboard to the sideline. And when he wanted to kind of accelerate the action of his team, he'd look around and ask the play keeper or the scribe or whatever this young man did for that clipboard, and he'd look at it for a minute, and then he'd raise it up and he'd pick one knee up and he would fracture that clipboard right across his leg. And then the next week, same clipboard wrapped in tape would be out there. But I can't impress upon you how much that very, very virile, peering man breaking a clipboard over his knee on the sideline could put the zip and zing in you.
Hey, George, I think some of this said about Mr. Brown. Remember, he was our trainer and your track.
Elmer Brown, yeah.
All together.
Yeah.
He went on to East Texas State later on, had some good track teams there.
Right.
Boy, he put boys out on the field. I didn't think we were going to be able to play that Friday night.
That's right. Mr. Brown was served as the trainer, so to speak, and the track coach, and was a very colorful person. And he had a twin brother. Both of them were dash people, and they did a fine job at Fort Ivy League.
Let me say this about George. He didn't tell on himself, and this is really good. Flora Wellhite brought this out, and I heard this story from Dan Stallworth and Red Bell so many times it wasn't funny. When I came here, this is all I heard, and that's that pulled out the game, visualize, it's 20-20. George has a cast on his hand, which is against the rule now. 20-20, and Dan jumping on the sideline, and Red Bell jumping on the sideline, and George Wamsley is going to hold the ball with no tee, and they forgot about his broken arm. He kept looking over there, and he has to hold the ball, and if they hadn't kicked the extra point, they'd have probably killed George Wamsley. Now, can you visualize under all this pressure, the stands are sold out, and while you mentioned about Brown, we've had Bill Parrish, a trainer at Ross Sterling, which, needless to say, our athletic program cannot be run without training. George Crow's over at the other school. We had at the time Bobby Gunn at that time, before that Beverly Rocko. And I had to mention this about George. When he talked about catching that punt, that wasn't near as critical. Dan said he would have killed that little man if he had.
Let me tell you about that extra point. That may have been true what Pete said about Mr. Stallworth and Mr. Bale, but I'm going to tell you the real story about that extra point. About that same period of time, I became acquainted with some young ladies in Houston who went to Lamar and those other schools, and they were having these little formal dances in there, and you needed a tuxedo to go to those dances. And so my father had told me kind of on the side that if the Ganners beat the Yellow Jackets, more than likely I could find my way to get a tuxedo. And so you can imagine that when that ball came back from that center, that it was going to go through those uprights some way. And my father made good to his word. I got one of those old blue, heavy serge types tuxedos that just swelter you, used to be. But that's the true story of that extra point.
I knew it was a true story.
Let me mention one other thing. And I'd intended to mention this previously, and I failed to do so. And I know there's a great deal of difference of opinion about this, but I'd like to tell you about the person I think is the finest athlete that ever came through Baytown schools. And certainly George was a great one. But the one I recall that I had the pleasure of seeing from time to time, I guess I saw him more extensively at the college level than anyone else, was the guy who got injured playing football out at Robert E. Lee and never played football again, primarily because of a badly shattered elbow. but he played basketball and he ran track. And as a youngster here in Baytown, they used to have a ping pong championship. And Wanda in the Sun Files, that she and I are the only two people probably in the whole community that read those things, but we keep telling each other how great they are, so she keeps going back and doing the research and publishing them. I read a time or two where this young man and his older brother were always playing in the finals at the old Humble Community Building. And he normally won, just as a youngster. He could play tennis, he could play golf, he could play handball. When I was a freshman at SMU, he led the Rice University basketball team to the Southwest Conference Championship, made the deciding basket against University of Texas that permitted them to win the conference championship. I went to the Southwest Conference track meet that year. He won the broad jump, placed second in the 220-yard dash. He placed in the 100-yard dash. He anchored the two relay teams at Rice. And a guy that, in my opinion, could do more things than anybody, any athlete